Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us, and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city? Perhaps the next story about betrayal will be from your city, and we start. The Beltway at Maplewood Drive was a picture postcard of middle-class America. Two-story houses with cracked vinyl siding, lawns bleached by last year's drought, and children's bicycles strewn across the driveways. It was the end of October, and there was that sharp freshness in the air that made it seem as if you smelled the smoke of a fire, even if there was none. Pumpkins sat crookedly on porches, some carved, some just waiting for the weekend. A pickup truck rumbled past, its muffler rattling as if it was keeping its word of honor. This was Hilliard, Ohio, not posh, not poor, just a place where people checked in at work, got home, and tried to keep their electric bills from getting out of control. David Grayson parked in the driveway of 214 Maplewood just after 6 p.m., throwing his orange vest into the passenger seat of an old Ford F-150. The engine coughed as he turned it off, and David sat for a minute, holding the steering wheel, looking at the garage door that hadn't opened properly since 22. He was 38, his broad shoulders were already beginning to round, and his beard hid the wrinkles that were creeping onto his face. Road workers did their job 10 hours under the sun or floodlights, breaking asphalt, dodging cars, breathing exhaust. The hands are rough, the knuckles are scarred from years of swinging a sledgehammer and wrestling with rebar. Quiet guy, really. He didn't say much until you asked, and even then he answered briefly and to the point. Reliable as hell, the one who will come to fix your sink ahead of time and will not expect gratitude. Inside, the house smelled of stale coffee and the faint aftertaste of something Kelly had microwaved for the kids. The living room was a survival dump, a sagging sofa with a crumpled blanket at one end, a coffee table littered with empty Monster cans, and an unfinished Lego spaceship that Ethan had abandoned. The TV was on low volume, some rewinding HGTV show about renovating houses that no one in the area could afford. David kicked off his steel-toed boots at the door, the soles in the dust of the asphalt, and tossed his keys on the counter. "Kel?" he called, his voice hoarse from a day spent shouting over equipment. There was no answer. He looked at his watch, 6:17. She's already at the bar, pouring beer and dodging drunks. Night shift again. He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the fatigue settle into his bones, and went to the refrigerator. 6 cans of Miller Lite stared at him, 3 left. He took one, opened it, took a long sip. The cold foam cut through the dryness in his throat. The children were upstairs. Ethan, 10, lay on the floor of his room, the Nintendo Switch glowing in his hands, and the faint sound of Mario Kart drifting down the hallway. Sophie, 6, sat in her room humming to herself, surrounded by a chaos of Barbies in mismatched clothes. David looked at her first. "Have you eaten, Soph?" he asked, leaning his elbows on the doorframe. She looked up, her blonde curls bouncing and a gap-toothed smile spreading across her face. "Mom made macaroni and cheese. I ate 2 bowls. Great," he nodded. "And Ethan?" "He's playing his stupid game," she said, rolling her eyes with the kind of drama that only a 6-year-old can muster. David chuckled, the corner of his mouth twitching into a half-smile, and he wandered down the corridor. Ethan didn't look up when his father entered, fingers pressing buttons, tongue hanging out in concentration. "Hey, food?" asked David. "Mom left something in the microwave, YouTube," Ethan muttered without looking up from the screen. "I'll eat later." "Eat now," David said more sternly. "You won't starve in front of me." Ethan groaned but paused the game, throwing the controller onto the bed with exaggerated desperation. David watched as he trudged downstairs, then took another sip of his beer. That was the rhythm he and the kids held down the fort while Kelly worked nights at the Rusty Tap. She's been there for 3 years now, ever since her part-time job at the kindergarten fell through. The bar paid better, she said. Tips are good. And yes, money was needed. The truck needed new tires. Sophie's school wanted $50 for a field trip, and the water heater sounded like it was going to die. But damn, those night shifts were exhausting for everyone. Across town, the Rusty Tap was bustling. Neon signs hummed in the windows. Budweiser, Coors, some local IPA that no one ordered. The jukebox blared Springsteen's Dancing in the Dark, loud enough to be felt in the chest, but not loud enough to drown out the clinking of bottles or the laughter of the barmaid. Kelly Grayson leaned against the counter, wiping it down with a rag that had seen better days. She's 35, still pretty enough to make heads turn, dark hair in a messy bun, green eyes that sparkle when she grins, a figure that fits perfectly in a black t-shirt. On her wrist is a tattoo of a small rose, done at 19, when she thought she would leave Ohio. Now it's just part of the uniform. Skinny jeans, sneakers, and a smile that will get an A out of even a poor truck driver. "Another one, Jimmy?" she asked, nodding at the guy who was drinking whiskey at the end of the counter. A regular customer over 50, in a checkered shirt, always smelled of diesel and melancholy. "Oh, to hell with it. Come on," Jimmy muttered, moving his glass. "You look great today, Kel." She flashed that asterisk thank you, but don't get your hopes up asterisk smiled and poured him a double. "Flattery will give you an extra ice cube, maybe." He laughed hoarsely and coughed. She moved on, filling a jug for the guys in Carhartt jackets arguing about the Browns' latest loss. The tap wasn't fancy sticky floors, a pool table with a crooked cue, a toilet that stank of bleach and worse, but it was hers in a way. She knew the orders of the regulars, the names of their wives, their stupid jokes. She flirted just enough to keep the tips flowing, a wink here, a laugh there, but she always said she knew the limits. David trusted her. I had to. What else can you do? Sit and watch her pour the shots. But the nights dragged on. By 11, her feet were aching in her Nikes, and the crowd was thinning to the point that they were stubborn that they would close the place. She found herself looking at her phone texts from David, usually "the kids are okay" or "don't forget the milk." She responded with a thumbs up or a heart and put it back in her pocket. Routine. That's what it was. But lately the routine has been pressing on me like a weight that cannot be lifted. She poured another glass, cracked another joke, and wondered when life had become so predictable. On Maplewood, David sat on the couch, second can of beer in hand, TV switched to ESPN. The children went to bed, or at least quieted down, and the house fell into that heavy silence that comes after a long day. He flipped through his phone, the weather for tomorrow, a text message from the foreman about the new Section 270, which will be demolished next week. I thought about writing to Kelly, but what should I say? "I miss." She would have laughed, called him soft. He put down the phone and stared at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. He didn't mind the silence. Never minded. Growing up, my father was a welder who spent half his life on the road, and his mother pulled double shifts at a diner. David learned early to take care of himself, pasta from a box, TV for company. Now he has a family, a mortgage, a job that pays the bills. Not glamorous, but his. And Kelly, she always wanted more. Not greedy, just more. She talked about trips that wouldn't happen, about a house with a big yard, about a life where she didn't wipe down counters at midnight. He nodded, said someday, and believed in it, although he didn't know how to get there. The clock struck 10. She'd be back by 2:30, maybe 3 if they stayed late. He will already be asleep. He gets up at 5 for his shift. Ships that disperse in the night, that's what they are. He finished his beer, crushed the can in his fist, and threw it in the trash. She hit the edge and fell to the floor. He didn't pick it up. Tomorrow, I thought. Everything is always tomorrow. Saturday dawned gray, with low clouds over Hilliard that threatened rain but held on for now. It was quiet on Maplewood, except for a dog barking somewhere in the distance, and the wind rustling the leaves that lay in heaps along the sidewalks. David was tinkering in the garage, trying to figure out why the lawnmower was stalling again. The old Briggs and Stratton, inherited from the previous owner of the house, was on its last legs. He was squatting, a wrench in his hand, spark plugs, and a rusty can of gasoline laid out around him. His hands are stained with oil, his forehead is furrowed. At such moments, he disconnected from everything, just him, the hardware, and the task. There was peace in this, albeit short-lived. Kelly left the house around noon, pulling on an old Ohio State sweatshirt and jeans that were slightly frayed at the knees. Her Chevy Malibu, parked on the side of the road, wouldn't start this morning. It just clicked when she turned the key, and that was it. The battery, she probably thought, or something worse. David was busy with his mower, and he didn't like tinkering with cars. He said it wasn't his thing. She decided not to pull it. Instead, she headed across the street to 217, where Mark Taylor lived. Mark was new to the area. He had moved a couple of months ago, bought a house from old Miller, who had gone to Florida to visit her daughter. He was about 40, tall, with short dark hair that was already touching with gray at the temples, and hands that betrayed a man accustomed to fixing something. He worked as a mechanic at an auto repair shop on Franklin Road, and his black Dodge Ram was always sitting in the driveway, covered in oil stains and with a set of tools in the back. The neighbors already knew him as a guy who was always ready to help either mow the lawn or remove snow. He smiled easily, lazily, and his eyes were dark, tenacious, as if he was always wondering about something. Kelly knocked on his door, shifting from foot to foot. The wind tugged at a strand of hair that had escaped from her bun, and she tucked it behind her ear. The door opened almost immediately. Mark was standing in a gray t-shirt and jeans, holding a can of beer, with a TV humming in the background with some kind of football match. "Kelly," he said, drawing out her name with a slight smirk. "What do you owe?" "The car died." She nodded over her shoulder at her Malibu. "It won't start. I think it's the battery, but I don't know. Can you take a look?" He leaned against the joint and took a sip from the can, not taking his eyes off her. "Can, but it will cost you." She rolled her eyes but smiled, the same smile she used to work at the bar. "What, will you issue a direct invoice? I thought neighbors would help for free." "Discount for pretty neighbors," he said with a wink and stepped outside, slamming the door behind him. "Let's go. Let's see what's wrong with your junk." They crossed the street and Mark immediately reached under the hood, while Kelly stood nearby with her arms crossed. He connected the tester to the battery, frowned, then poked it somewhere with a screwdriver. She watched him work. The movements were confident, without fuss, as if he had done this 1,000 times. He had a scar on his wrist, long and jagged, as if from a burn. She wondered where he was from, but didn't ask. "The battery is alive," he said finally, straightening up. "The problem is in the starter, most likely. It clicks, right?" "Yeah," she nodded. "Is it expensive to fix?" "For you, no." He wiped his hands on his jeans, leaving dark stains. "I have a Malibu starter lying in the garage. I can install it. But not today. I'm in the middle of the second half." She chuckled. "Oh, sorry for distracting me from sacred football." "Nothing." He stepped a little closer, his voice becoming lower. "I might as well miss a couple of goals for your sake." Kelly felt a warmth creep up her neck, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she tilted her head and narrowed her eyes. "Be careful, Mark. I'm married, in case you forgot." "I haven't forgotten," he grinned wider. "But you came yourself, Kel. I'm just helping." She laughed short, loudly, like in a bar when someone makes a stupid joke. "Okay, hero. When can you fix it?" "Tomorrow morning. Come with coffee and I'll do everything." "We agree," she said, already turning away. "Just don't think that I'll bake you a pie." "I wouldn't refuse," he shouted after her, and she heard him laugh before the door to his house slammed. Kelly returned home, still with a slight smile on her lips. It was warm inside and smelled of coffee that David had brewed in the morning and forgotten to turn off. She threw her sweatshirt over the back of the sofa and walked into the kitchen, where David had already moved out of the garage. He stood at the sink, washing his hands of oil, a towel slung over his shoulder. There was a can of beer on the table, fresh, just opened. "Where were you?" he asked without turning around, his voice even as usual. "Mark's," she said, opening the refrigerator to get herself some water. "The car didn't start. He said it was the starter. We'll fix it tomorrow." David nodded, wiping his hands. He turned and looked at her, a short glance, nothing special, but something in her tone, in the way she stood, a little more relaxed than usual, caught his attention. She looked. Not exactly different, but more alive, perhaps. Her eyes sparkled, as if she had just won an argument or heard a good joke. He shook his head. Nonsense, just fatigue playing with him. Night shifts, his early rises, they are both exhausted, that's all. How much does he want for it? He asked, more to fill the silence. Nothing, she shrugged, taking a sip of water. He said that he had a spare part. I only asked to bring coffee. David muttered, sitting down at the table. Generous guy. Yeah, she grinned and put the bottle on the counter. Neighborhood solidarity, apparently. The conversation died down. David watched her move around the kitchen, pouring herself more water, fixing her hair, humming something under her breath. She always did this, but today there was something else in it, an ease that he had not noticed for a long time. Maybe she's just glad that the car will be fixed for free. Maybe he thinks too much. He took a sip of his beer, clearing his thoughts. Mark was a normal guy. He was helping with the lawn last summer when their mower broke for the first time. Just a neighbor. Nothing like that. Are you okay? He asked suddenly, not knowing why. She froze for a second, then turned around, raising an eyebrow. Yes, but what? I don't know, he shrugged. You look more cheerful than usual. Maybe because I'm not behind the bar, she said with a slight mockery. Or because you don't have to spend half your salary on a car. Maybe, he nodded, and that was all. He didn't dig deeper. For what? She's right, a shift at the bar would have squeezed her out like a lemon, but here she is at home on Saturday without drunken faces in her face. Everything is logical. Kelly went upstairs to check on the kids, leaving him with a beer and a vague feeling that he was missing something. He finished the can, crushed it, threw it in the trash. This time he hid it. Tomorrow Mark will fix the car and everything will be back to normal. He had no doubt about it. Almost. It's been a week since that Saturday morning when Mark fixed the starter on the Malibu. David then went out into the yard while the neighbor was finishing up work. Mark was lying under the car, only his legs sticking out, and Kelly was standing next to him with a mug of coffee in her hands, laughing at something he said from under the hood. David didn't listen. He simply nodded to Mark as he climbed out, dirty, but pleased with himself. Thanks, man, David said, shaking his hand, and he replied, no problem, get in touch. Kelly handed Mark the coffee, and they went their separate ways, he to his house, she and David back to theirs. The car started up from the first turn, and that was all, it would seem, over. But it's not over. Over the next few days, Kelly began to mention Mark more often, unobtrusively, casually, but David began to notice. On Monday, she said she would go to him for a screwdriver because one of the doorknobs in the house was loose and their toolkit was missing. She returned half an hour later with a screwdriver and a bag of cookies, which, according to her, Mark forced her to take. His sister had baked too many. David shrugged, took a cookie, chocolate, nuts, nothing special, and ate a couple of them while he watched the news. But it flashed in my head. Half an hour for a screwdriver? He pushed the thought away. Nonsense. On Wednesday night, after dinner, Kelly walked across the street again. David was in the living room with the children. Sophie was drawing something with felt-tip pens. Ethan was driving cars on the carpet. Kelly shouted from the doorway, I'm going to see Mark. He promised to look at why the coffee maker is humming, and slammed the door before he could answer. David frowned at the closed door. Coffee maker. It had been buzzing for a month now, and they somehow lived with it. He got up and went to the window. The curtain fluttered slightly when he pulled it aside. Mark's window was shining across the street, and he saw Kelly walk inside, her silhouette flashing in the doorway. She returned 40 minutes later, empty-handed, but with the same easy smile that he had seen a week ago. What about the coffee maker? He asked as she kicked off her sneakers at the door. Yes, it's some kind of garbage with a filter, she said, shrugging her shoulders. Mark said he'll sort it out if we bring it in tomorrow. Tomorrow? David asked, raising an eyebrow. Is he our personal master now? Kelly chuckled, walked past him into the kitchen, and poured herself some water. It just helps, David. Don't start. I'm not starting, he said, although his tone was already a little sharper than he intended. It's just strange that you run there every day. She turned around and looked at him, not evil, but with a slight challenge. Every day, twice a week is now every day. Relax, he's just a neighbor. David nodded, swallowed the taunt that was on the tip of his tongue, and returned to the sofa. Sophie ran up and handed him a drawing of a crooked house with smoke coming from a chimney. He praised, was distracted, but the aftertaste remained. She's right twice is not every day. But still something stuck. Maybe the way she talked about Mark was not intense, not with enthusiasm, but just too easy. It was as if he was already a part of their lives. By Friday, suspicions began to grow like weeds that grow through cracks in the asphalt. In the morning, Kelly left for the day shift at the Rusty Tap, a rarity when she was assigned during the day, but the bartender was sick, and she agreed to leave. David was home, taking time off after a week of rain that flooded the 270 property and delayed work. He decided to disassemble the garage, throw out the junk, find that damn set of tools so that Kelly would no longer have to run around for screwdrivers. While he was rummaging through the boxes, Mark drove up in his Dodge. David heard the roar of the engine, looked out. The neighbor got out of the cab, stretched, and glanced across the street. Their eyes met. Mark nodded. David nodded back. Nothing special, just a regular hello between guys. But then Mark went to his mailbox, and David noticed that their coffee maker was sitting on his porch. The same one that Kelly supposedly didn't bring yesterday. He froze, holding a rusty hammer in his hands, and stared at her. Black, with a worn button exactly theirs. He put down the hammer, wiped his hands on his pants, and walked across the street. Mark was already at the door, leafing through the letters in his hands. "Hey, Mark," David called, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Is this our coffee maker?" Mark turned around, looked at the porch, then at David. "Oh, yes. Kelly brought it in last night. Did she say that you would deal with her?" "Last night?" David asked, frowning slightly. "Kelly returned from work at 11, said she was tired, and went straight to bed. She didn't mention any Mark." "Well, yes," Mark shrugged, as if it didn't matter. "Dropped in for a minute while I was ordering pizza. She said that you were busy with the children and asked to take a look. I haven't had time yet, I just went home." David nodded, although something sank inside him. He wasn't busy with the kids yesterday. He and Kelly watched the show until she passed out on the couch. Why would she lie about this? He forced himself to smile, briefly, without teeth. "Okay, thank you. Let's figure it out." "No problem." Mark patted him on the shoulder, lightly, like a neighbor, and went into the house. David took the coffee maker and returned to the garage. He put her on the workbench and stared as if she could explain something. Maybe she actually stopped by for a minute. Maybe I forgot to mention. But why then did she tell Mark that he was busy? He shook his head and returned to the boxes. Fatigue, that's all. He thinks too much. In the evening, Kelly returned from work around 7, threw her bag at the door, and kicked off her sneakers. David cooked dinner pasta with sauce from a jar, nothing complicated, but the children liked it. She entered the kitchen, ruffled the hair of Sophie, who was spinning around the table, and plopped down on a chair. "It was a hell of a day," she said, rubbing her neck. "Some asshole spilled beer on the counter and yelled that I was working slowly." "I'm sorry," David muttered, stirring the sauce. He glanced at her over his shoulder. "I took the coffee maker from Mark." She froze for a second, then nodded as if she remembered. "Oh, exactly. I brought it in yesterday. I forgot to tell you." "Did he fix it?" "No, he said that you came in while he was ordering pizza." David turned and crossed his arms. "He said that I was busy with the children." Kelly blinked, then chuckled, looking away. "Well, yes, I didn't want to pull you. You and Sophie were watching something, right?" "I watched it with you," he corrected. His voice was even, but a shadow appeared in it. "You fell asleep, I woke you up, and you went to bed." She shrugged her shoulders and smiled a little forcedly, but quickly pulled herself together. "Oh, I got it wrong. I was tired yesterday. My brain was a mess. The main thing is that there is a coffee maker at home, right?" "Yes," he said, returning to the stove. "The main thing is that you are at home." He didn't press. "For what?" "She's tired, confused, it happens." But something stirred in my chest, not anger, not fear, but just a chill. She didn't look him in the eye when she answered, but Kelly always looked him in the eye, even when she was lying about not eating the last slice of pizza. He turned off the stove and called the children to the table. Dinner went as usual. Sophie chatted about school. Ethan complained about homework. Kelly joked that they should move to a place where there were no teachers. David ate in silence, looking at her. She seemed the same, a little disheveled, a little irritated by work, but the same. And yet something was wrong. Elusive, like a shadow that flickers in the corner of your eye and disappears when you turn around. Later, when the children had gone to bed and Kelly was sitting on the sofa with the phone, David went out into the yard to smoke, a rare habit, only when his nerves were naughty. He took a drag, looking across the street at Mark's house. The lights in the living room were on, shadows moving behind the curtains. Maybe it's pizza, football, and loneliness, or maybe something else. He exhaled smoke and rubbed the cigarette butt on the railing. Tomorrow he will ask about the coffee maker again. Or he won't ask. I didn't know yet. But the bells were already ringing quietly on the edge of consciousness, and there was nothing to drown them out. Wednesday evening was damp, and heavy rain drizzled all day, leaving puddles on the asphalt and the smell of wet earth in the air. Maplewood was quiet, only the light from the windows of the houses made its way through the gray darkness. David left for the night shift, a rarity, but a section of the roadside collapsed on 270, and he was called urgently. He drove off in his F-150 around 6, throwing Kelly a curt, "Be back in the morning," over his shoulder. The kids were already in bed, Sophie curled up with a stuffed bunny. Ethan pulled the blanket over his head, leaving the switch on the nightstand. The house was silent, only the refrigerator was humming in the kitchen, and the drops were knocking on the windowsill. Kelly sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone. TikTok, memes, nothing that caught her eye. She was wearing an old t-shirt and leggings, her hair down, a little tangled from a long day. The bar let her out early today. There were almost no people because of the weather, and the manager said to close early. She could have gone to bed, but there was some kind of restlessness in her body, like an itch that could not be relieved. She got up, went to the window, and pulled back the curtain. Across the street, Mark's house was lit dimly, only the lamp in the garage. The door was slightly open, and from there came the faint clink of metal. He was fixing something, as always. She didn't think long. I put on my sneakers, threw on a sweatshirt, and grabbed an umbrella, more for appearance than for protection from the rain. She ran across the road, feeling the drops hitting her shoulders, and knocked on the garage door. The sound inside died down, then footsteps were heard. Mark appeared in the doorway, wearing a black t-shirt with oil stains, his jeans dirty, his hair disheveled. A wrench in his hands, the same lazy grin on his face. "Kelly," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "What, something broke again?" "No," she stepped inside, folding her umbrella. "It's just boring. The house is quiet, David is on shift, the children are sleeping." He narrowed his eyes, threw the rag onto the workbench, and leaned his hip against it. The garage was cramped, littered with junk toolboxes, an old motorcycle without a wheel, cans of paint along the walls. It smelled of gasoline, metal, and something acrid, like solvent. The lamp overhead hummed, casting sharp shadows. "It's boring," he repeated, crossing his arms. "And you decided that I would entertain here?" She chuckled, looking him over slowly, with a slight challenge. "What, you can't? You look like you have nothing to do either." Mark grinned and stepped closer, not looking away. "Can. But you're married, Kel, or does this no longer count?" She didn't answer right away. She just looked at him, green eyes against dark ones. The air between them thickened, as if before a thunderstorm. Then she shrugged, briefly, almost casually. "Counts. But that's not what I came for. I don't know. I wanted some movement." "Divijuhi," he repeated this word, stretching it out as if tasting it. Then he nodded towards the workbench. "Then help. Hold this." He handed her a screwdriver and pointed at some rusty carburetor that was lying on the table. She took it, came closer, and stood next to him. He leaned over the part, began to twist the bolts, and she held it, watching his hands move strong, confident, with calluses and that scar on his wrist. They were silent for a couple of minutes, only the clanking of instruments and the rain outside. But the tension was growing. She felt his warmth, the smell of sweat and oil, a closeness that made her breath hitch a little. "Are you always so silent?" she asked to break the silence. "Only when there's someone nearby who talks too much." He glanced sideways at her, the corner of his mouth twitching. "But you don't seem to be one of those people." "Not one of those," she agreed, and her voice became lower, softer. She put the screwdriver down, crossed her arms, and leaned a little closer. "Which one are you from, Mark?" He straightened up, threw the wrench onto the table, and turned fully towards her. Now there was less of a step between them, and he did not retreat. One of those who does not refuse when offered. She didn't have time to answer or didn't want to. He grabbed her by the waist, sharply, but not roughly, and pulled her towards him. She didn't push him away, on the contrary. Her hands lay on his chest, her fingers squeezing the fabric of his t-shirt. The lips found each other quickly, without foreplay, without tenderness, a hard, hungry kiss, as if both had been waiting for this longer than they were willing to admit. The rain muffled the sounds, and the garage became their world, cramped, dirty, reeking of sin. Mark pushed her towards the workbench, and she gave in, her back resting against the edge of the table. Tools fell to the floor with a crash, a screwdriver, a couple of nuts, something heavy hit the concrete. He lifted her sweatshirt, his hands slid under her t-shirt, roughly, but she didn't mind. On the contrary, she arched forward, her breathing ragged, hot. Her fingers grabbed his hair, pulling while he bit her neck, leaving red marks that she would have to hide later. It wasn't about love, it wasn't even about desire, it was excitement, an adrenaline rush, like jumping off a cliff when you don't think what will happen below. He pulled her leggings down, not all the way, just to get there, and she unbuttoned his jeans in one motion quickly, without ceremony. The workbench creaked as he lifted her, sitting her on the edge, and she wrapped her legs around him, digging her nails into his shoulders. The movements were sharp, almost mechanical, no words, only hoarse breathing, moans that escaped through clenched teeth, and the sound of wood hitting the wall. The lamp swayed above them, shadows darted, like in some cheap thriller. It lasted about 5 minutes, maybe less, pure physics, without feelings, without aftertaste. Just two bodies that were looking for release and found it in the dirt of a garage. When it was all over, he pulled away first, breathing heavily and buttoning his jeans. She slid down from the workbench, pulled on her leggings, and straightened her t-shirt. His face was flushed, his hair stuck to his forehead, but there was no guilt or regret in his eyes, only emptiness, like after a good workout. Mark took a can of beer from the shelf, opened it, took a sip, then handed it to her. She shook her head and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Well," he said, his voice hoarse but calm, "was the movement a success?" She chuckled, almost laughed, but the sound came out dry. "It was a success." Then, until next time, he nodded towards the door, as if nothing had happened, as if she had just come in for a screwdriver. Kelly took her umbrella and walked out into the rain without looking back. Her hair was wet, her sweatshirt was soaked with moisture, but she was in no hurry. The house was quiet as before, only now the silence seemed thicker. She took off her wet clothes in the bathroom and took a shower, hot, quick, washing away Mark's smell, oil, sweat. Then she lay down in bed and pulled the blanket up to her chin. My heart was still pounding, but my thoughts were empty. She didn't think about David, didn't think about what would happen tomorrow. It was just a moment out of routine, and it ended. Bye. Across the street, Mark put away his tools, finished his beer, and turned off the lamp. The garage became just a garage again, cold, dirty, with a rusty carburetor on the table. He felt nothing special, neither triumph nor remorse. It was like fixing a car. I did it, and it was fine. The rain pattered on the roof, drowning out everything else, and the night continued on as if nothing had happened. David woke up early, before the alarm clock, although yesterday's night shift at 270 had squeezed him dry. He lay there for about 10 minutes, looking at the ceiling, listening to Kelly breathing softly next to her. She was sleeping on her side, her knees pulled up to her chest, her hair scattered across the pillow. Yesterday, she returned from work late around 2 and immediately collapsed into bed, muttering something about being tired. He didn't wake her up, he just lay down next to her and passed out. Now the morning lay before him empty, it was a day off, the children were still sleeping, and for the first time in a week, there was no need to run anywhere. He stood up, pulled on jeans and an old flannel shirt, and went downstairs. The kitchen was in semi-darkness, only a faint light came through the curtains. The coffee maker stood there, still unrepaired. Mark never returned it to working order, although Kelly assured him that he would figure it out. David turned it on, listened to it hum, spat a couple of drops into the mug, and turned it off. To hell with it, he thought, and took out a jar of instant liquid from the cabinet. While the water was heating up, he went to the window and pulled back the curtain. The street was empty, except for Mrs. Crawford's old sedan pulling toward the corner and a garbage bag bouncing along the sidewalk, blown by the wind. He noticed movement across the road. Mark came out of his garage, wearing a black jacket and jeans, with a plastic bag in his hands. Apparently, he was taking out the trash. Kelly appeared behind him. David froze, his hand with a spoon of coffee hanging in the air. She was wearing the same Ohio State sweatshirt she'd worn all week, her jeans tight to her legs, her sneakers slightly stained with mud. She said something to Mark, who turned around and grinned. They stood by his trash cans, about 10 meters from the house, and David saw them through the cloudy glass, not clearly, but enough. Mark threw the bag into the tank, slammed the lid, then stepped towards her. She didn't recoil, on the contrary, she leaned slightly toward him, as if she was continuing the joke. And then he did it. Mark's hand slid onto her breast, squeezing her, without hesitation, as if it was normal. Kelly laughed and pushed his hand away, but not harshly, not angrily, rather playfully, as if this was their personal ritual. Mark didn't stop. His second hand went to her butt, squeezed it, pulled her closer. She laughed again, poked him in the shoulder, but did not pull away, did not leave. They stood there for about 3 seconds, maybe 5, until she finally stepped back, waving her hand, and walked towards her house. Mark watched her leave, hands in his pockets, with the same lazy grin he always had. David felt the blood rush into his temples. The spoon clanged on the counter, and the coffee scattered into small black dots. He didn't move, just watched Kelly walk across the street, her steps slowing down on their porch. She entered the house through the front door. He heard the lock click and kick off her sneakers in the hallway. His stomach clenched as if someone had punched him in the gut, but he didn't move. Her face was burning, her throat was dry, and the same frame was spinning in her head. Mark's hand on her chest, the other on her butt. Her laughter was light, carefree, as if it didn't mean anything. "Are you up already?" Kelly's voice came from the corridor, a little sleepy, but cheerful. She walked into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes, her hair more tangled than in her sleep. "I thought you'd be sleeping until lunch after the night." He didn't turn around right away. He clenched his fists, unclenched them, and forced himself to breathe evenly. Then he turned, slowly, keeping his face stony. "I couldn't sleep," he said, his voice slightly hoarse, but she didn't notice. "Do you want some coffee?" "Yeah, if this thing works." She nodded towards the coffee maker, plopped down on a chair, and stretched. Mark had it. He said that the filter was clogged, but there was no time to fix it. "I should probably get a new one." David nodded, pouring boiling water into a mug of instant. His hands moved automatically, but everything was boiling inside, not anger, not rage, but something dull, heavy, like a blow to one's pride. Mark had it, just now, and he pawed her, and she laughed. And now he sits here as if nothing happened and talks about the coffee maker. He placed the mug in front of her, spilling a couple of drops on the table, and sat down opposite her. "You go to see him often?" he said, looking at her. Not a question, just a fact, but something sharp appeared in the voice. She looked up, shrugged, and cupped her mug in her hands. "Not often. He's just nearby, and he's rummaging through it all. You don't like to tinker with technology." "I don't like it," he agreed, but he didn't look away, and Mark loves it. She chuckled, took a sip of coffee, and winced it was too hot. "So what? He's a normal guy, he helps." "Not everyone can be like you." with hands from the right place. David clenched his teeth. Normal guy. He saw how this normal guy grabbed her breasts as if she were not his wife, but some kind of bar girl. But he was silent. What can I say? I saw him groping you. She will laugh and say that he is making it up, or worse, she will get angry and start yelling that he doesn't trust her. Or maybe he won't deny it, he'll just shrug his shoulders as if it's a small thing. He didn't know which was worse. Are you okay? She asked, narrowing her eyes. You look like you've been breaking asphalt all night. I'm tired, he muttered, looking away. It was a hard night. Yeah, you look lousy. She stood up and patted him on the shoulder, lightly, like a child. Go get some more sleep. I'll wake up the children. She went upstairs, her steps knocked on the stairs, and he remained sitting, looking into his mug. The coffee was cooling, the steam was rising in thin streams, and he felt as if he had just been hit by a truck, not physically, but inside, somewhere deep, where men like him don't like to delve. This was not just flirting, not just her stupid jokes with bar regulars. It was real Mark's hand on her, her laugh, as if she liked it. His wife. Hi, Kelly. He got up and went to the window again. Mark's house was dark, only the garage light was on, like last night. David imagined him sitting there, fixing something, grinning like he knew he'd won. The blow to his pride burned like acid, but he didn't go across the road, didn't break in, didn't hit Mark in the face. Not his style. He's not the type to yell and wave his fists. He was silent, always silent, even when everything was torn inside. The kids came downstairs, Sophie in unicorn pajamas, Ethan with disheveled hair, both yawning. Kelly rattled dishes, took out cereal, and chatted with them about school. David looked at her from the side, the way she smiled at Sophie, the way she winked at Ethan, as if nothing had changed. But for her, maybe it hasn't changed. Maybe it was just a game for her, like winking at a drunk truck driver for an extra dollar tip. But for him, it was a knife in the ribs, and he didn't know how to get it out without destroying everything they had. He took his jacket, muttered, I'll go for a walk, and went out into the yard. The cold bit his cheeks, the wind ruffled his hair, but he walked slowly along the street, past Mark's house. I didn't look there, I didn't want to. I just walked, trying to shake what I saw out of my head, but it stuck like mud to my shoes. He didn't know what to do, remain silent further, wait until it goes away on its own, or ignore everything and ask directly. But for now he was just walking, and every step felt like a dull pain in his chest, as if someone was hitting him with a hammer over and over again. After that Saturday, David changed, not on the outside, not in a way that Kelly or the kids would notice, but something inside clicked, like a switch that couldn't be turned back. He no longer asked her about Mark, didn't get caught up in details, didn't reveal what he saw. He was silent as always, but now this silence was different, heavy, sharp, like the blade that he kept in his pocket. He didn't know what to do with this. Go to Mark, punch him, kick Kelly out, scream until he's hoarse. All this was not about him. David was one of those who fix, not break. But there was nothing to repair here, and he decided to dig. Not for revenge, not yet. Just to know. On Monday, he stopped by Home Depot after his shift. The sun was already setting. The sky was purple, with dirty streaks of clouds. He took the cart and went to the electronics department slowly, as if he was choosing light bulbs or paint. As a result, I bought 3 video surveillance cameras, small, wireless, with an application for my phone. The salesman, a guy in his 20s with an eyebrow piercing, asked, "For the house or the garage?" David muttered, "For everything," and paid in cash. At home, he hid the boxes in the garage behind an old tool chest, where Kelly had never climbed. I started installing it late Tuesday evening, after Kelly had left for her night shift and the kids were sleeping. He attached the first camera above the porch. The viewing angle captured their yard and a part of the street up to Mark's house. The second one was hidden in the bushes near the passage between their house and the neighboring one, where the shadow hid everything that casual eyes did not need to see. I placed the third one in the attic, next to a small window that looked directly onto Mark's garage and backyard. I fiddled around for about 2 hours, checking the angles through the phone. The image was clear. With night mode, The sound was weak, but discernible. He sat in the attic, dusty and cold, watching the app show Mark's empty garage, feeling both like an idiot and a hunter. When finished, he put the phone in his pocket and went to bed. Kelly returned in the morning. He pretended to be asleep. The first entry arrived on Wednesday afternoon. David was at work, standing by the side of 270, waving a flag while the excavator leveled the ground. The phone beeped a notification from the application. He went to the truck and opened the video. The drive-through camera caught the moment. Kelly was walking toward Mark, wearing jeans and a jacket, her hair in a bun. There was nothing in her hands. She was just walking quickly, as if on business. 5 minutes later, she left his house, straightened her jacket, and went to her room. Nothing special, but David noticed how she looked around before entering them. He gritted his teeth and turned off the screen, maybe for the screwdriver again, maybe at the coffee maker, or maybe not. Later that evening, he sat in the garage, checking notes while Kelly prepared dinner. The camera in the attic caught another moment short, but dirty. Mark came out of the garage. Kelly stood at his fence, saying something, laughing. He walked up, grabbed her by the waist, and pulled her towards him. The kiss is fast, hard, like a blow. She pushed him away, but not right away, and not too much more for show. Then she left, and he stood looking after her and returned to the garage. David watched it in slow motion, frame by frame, feeling his fingers squeeze the phone until the plastic cracked. This was not what he saw on Saturday, not brazen pawing in plain sight, but something secret, quick, as if they knew they could be noticed. He turned off the video, finished the beer that was standing nearby, and went into the house. Kelly called to the table. Her voice was cheerful and normal. He ate in silence, looking at his plate. Thursday brought more. In the morning, while David was busy with the lawnmower in the yard, Kelly said that she was going to Mark to get some screws. Supposedly the shelf in the nursery was wobbly. He nodded without looking at her and continued turning the nuts. An hour later, the phone beeped. The drive-through camera showed her entering Mark's garage, the door closing behind her. 20 minutes later, another camera, the one in the attic, caught them against the wall of the garage in the shadows, where the light from the lamp barely reached. Mark pressed her against the wall, his hands under her jacket. She clasped his neck, her legs slightly spread. It was not a kiss, but more sudden movements, her head thrown back, his palms squeezing her hips. It lasted about 2 minutes, then she pushed him away, straightened her hair, and left. He stayed, lit a cigarette, and exhaled smoke into the ceiling. David watched this, standing at the lawnmower, and felt the ground disappear from under his feet. It wasn't passionate sex like last time, but something quick, dirty, almost routine. As if this was not the first time they had done this. He saved the recording, added it to a folder on his phone, which he called Work. Kelly had never gotten into his phone, but he set a password anyway. In the evening, when she returned from work, he asked how things were with the shelf. She waved her hand. Mark gave me the screws. I'll tighten them tomorrow. He nodded and did not dig. But everything inside was shrinking, not from anger, but from some kind of sick clarity. She's lying. Not about the screws, maybe, but about what's between him and Mark. And this is not just flirting. Friday got worse. David left for the day shift and returned at 6. Kelly was at home, making pizza for the children, humming something under her breath. He checked the cameras while she wasn't looking. Recording from the attic time, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Mark's garage, the door is slightly open. Kelly is inside, on her knees, in front of him. Mark stands with his hands in her hair, his head slightly thrown back. It lasted less than a minute. She stood up, wiped her mouth, and left. He buttoned up his jeans, sat down on the box, and lit a cigarette. The sound was faint, but David heard her giggle before she left. He watched it 3 times, zooming in until the screen swam before his eyes. His stomach twisted. He barely made it to the bathroom. He vomited into the toilet quietly, so that the children would not hear. Then he washed his face and stood at the sink for a long time, looking in the mirror. His face is gray, his eyes are red, as if he hasn't slept for a week. He had already collected 5 recordings in 3 days' short meetings, each dirtier than the last. at the fence, against the wall, on your knees. No long conversations, no feelings, just sex, fast and rough, as if they were taking minutes between activities. David didn't know how often this happened before the cameras, but now he saw. This was not an accident, not a one-time breakdown. This is a system. The web that spun behind his back while he was breaking the asphalt on the road and thought that everything was fine with them. He didn't tell her anything. He didn't show the recording, didn't throw the phone in her face, didn't go to Mark with his fists. I just watched her cut the pizza, laugh with Ethan, and kiss Sophie on the forehead before bed. She was the same Kelly, his Kelly, the mother of his children, the woman with whom he had slept in the same bed for 15 years. But now he saw another, the one who laughs with Mark, who gives herself to him in the garage, who lies in his eyes without blinking. And he didn't know what to do about it. For now, he was simply collecting material, like an investigator hoarding evidence, not daring to open a case. But each entry cut deeper, and he felt like something was tearing inside him slowly, quietly, irreversibly. A week of camera footage sat like a heavy burden on his phone, 5 videos, 5 blows, each stronger than the last. He had not slept properly for several days. His eyes were sunken. There were dark circles under them, but he held on. At work, he waved a flag. At home, he joked with the children. And with Kelly, he spoke briefly but evenly. She didn't notice anything or pretended not to notice. And he looked at her and saw two women, one who was cooking pasta and kissing him on the cheek, and the other who was tumbling with Mark in the garage, by the fence, on her knees. And he didn't know how to connect them. Sunday evening was quiet. The kids went to bed early. Sophie passed out after watching cartoons. Ethan fell asleep with his headphones on, listening to some podcast about space. Kelly left for her night shift at the Rusty Tap, calling over her shoulder, "I'll be back by 2, don't wait up." David nodded, as always, and was left alone. The house was silent, only the clock in the living room was ticking, and the wind rustled outside the window, cold, but dry, without rain. He was sitting on the sofa, holding a bottle of whiskey, a cheap Jim Beam, bought a couple of months ago at a crossroads. Usually, he didn't drink strong drinks, only beer, but today beer didn't help. He poured himself a glass, 2 fingers, and took a sip. The liquid burned his throat, but the warmth spread through his chest, slightly dulling what was gnawing at him from the inside. He thought about forgiveness. Not out loud, not in words, but the way men like him think in fragments, in pictures. Maybe it's a crisis. Maybe Kelly was just tired from the routine, from the night shifts, from him. They have been together for 15 years, 2 children, a mortgage, bills, and somewhere there, under all this, she has lost herself. He remembered how she was at 20, bold, with sparkles in her eyes, dreaming of moving to California and opening a bar on the beach. And now she's here in Hilliard, pouring beer for truckers and sleeping 4 hours a night. Maybe Mark is her way of exhaling, of releasing a load. Maybe it was his own fault he didn't notice, didn't ask, didn't give her what she needed. He took another sip and winced. Forgiveness seemed close, not easy, but possible. Talk, lay everything out, say, "I know, let's figure it out." Maybe she'll cry, maybe she'll say it's a mistake, and they'll start over. He could almost see it, her tears, his hand on her shoulder, the promise to try again. But then he opened the laptop. Not on purpose, not with a plan, just a hand reached out. Whiskey was buzzing in his head, and he wanted to check the cameras. The phone was far away, in the kitchen, and the laptop was here, on the table, with the same application. He entered the password and opened the Records tab. The last video loaded itself, camera from the attic, time 6:47 p.m., less than an hour ago. He clicked play, not expecting to see anything new. He expected another quick kiss near the garage, another scene that had already burned out his retina. But this was different. The screen showed Mark's Dodge parked at his house, backed up to the garage. The rear windows were dark, but the camera caught movement. The shadows inside were moving and merging. Then the glass lowered a little, and he saw her, Kelly, her hair disheveled, her face flushed, her lips parted. She was sitting in the back seat, her top up, her bra knocked to the side, her breasts bare. Mark was above her, his shirt unbuttoned, his hands squeezing her hips. They moved not quickly, not like in a garage, but with a kind of laziness, as if they were savoring it. Her legs wrapped around him, one hand grabbed the seat, the other pulled his hair. The sound was muffled, but he heard her moan low, hoarse, such as he had not heard from her for 10 years. Mark muttered something, she laughed, briefly, and they continued rhythmically, without haste, as if they had the whole night ahead of them. David watched without blinking. The glass of whiskey trembled in his hand, the liquid splashed on his fingers, but he did not notice. It wasn't just sex, not a quickie in the garage, not a moment of weakness. It was personal. She tumbled with him in his car, 2 steps from their house, while he sat here and thought about how to forgive her. He saw how she arched, how her fingers squeezed his neck, how she moved towards him. It wasn't about excitement or fatigue, it was about her and Mark, about the fact that they already have something that he and she haven't had for a long time. The video was 4 minutes long. On the fourth, he turned it off abruptly, slamming the lid of the laptop. The glass fell to the floor, whiskey spilled on the carpet, but he did not bend down to pick it up. I sat staring at the wall, breathing heavily, as if I had run a mile. One frame was spinning in my head, her face, her laughter, her body under Mark. There was no longer any doubt. This is not a crisis, not an accident, not an exhalation. This is betrayal, brazen, dirty, right under his nose. And she didn't just sleep with her neighbor, she enjoyed it, as if he, David, was somewhere far away in another life. He got up, went to the kitchen, took another bottle, not whiskey, but beer that was in the refrigerator. He opened it and took a sip, but it tasted like water. He returned to the living room, sat down, and opened the laptop again. I reviewed the recording, not all of it, just the first 30 seconds, to make sure that it was not a dream, not a glitch from fatigue. It was her. Hi, Kelly. And she didn't just sleep with Mark, she lived with him in those short, dirty moments, while he broke his back on the road and made plans to get her back. He thought about the conversation, about sitting down with her, asking, why? I thought about how she would make excuses, cry, say that it didn't mean anything. But now he didn't want it. I didn't want her tears, her lies, her hands on my shoulders. Forgiveness, which had been looming somewhere on the edge, collapsed like an old bridge under the weight of a truck. He won't forgive. Not now. Not after this. The clock struck midnight. Kelly will return in 2 hours, come in, throw her bag, and say something about work. And he will sit here, with a bottle in his hand, with notes on his laptop, and look at her as if she were someone else's. He didn't know what he would do next, kick her out, leave on his own, show her the video, or simply remain silent until he decided. But he knew one thing for sure. The Kelly he loved was dead somewhere in the backseat of Mark's Dodge, and she couldn't be brought back. He finished his beer, put the bottle on the table, and for the first time in a week, he felt emptiness, not pain, not anger, but simply nothing. And that was the worst of all. The days after that night with the laptop dragged on like thick tar, slow, sticky, with a bitter aftertaste. David didn't sleep, didn't eat normally, just worked, drank beer, and watched the recordings that were accumulating on his phone and laptop. He didn't say anything more than usual to Kelly. How are you? What's for dinner for the kids? Will you be back late? She answered as always. Sometimes she joked. Sometimes she was angry that he was gloomy as hell. He nodded, remained silent, went into the garage or onto the sofa, where he could sit for hours, looking into emptiness. The children noticed that Dad was strange, but did not interfere. Sophie drew him pictures. Ethan asked about homework, and he answered, keeping his face straight, and everything inside was rotting, like an old wooden fence in the rain. By mid-December, he had already collected more than a dozen tapes short, dirty meetings between Kelly and Mark, caught on camera. On the fence, in the garage, in the car, at the back door of his house. It was like a TV series that he couldn't turn off. He cut every episode, but he watched, enlarged the frames, wrote down the time and place. He didn't know why until one day, sitting in the garage with a can of Miller Lite, he saw an old printer in the corner. HP, dusty but working, with a stack of paper nearby. The idea came on its own, angry, sick, but with some kind of black humor that he had not noticed in himself before. Calendar, the real one, with her face, with her body, with her betrayal. He chuckled, took a sip, and for the first time in weeks, the corner of his mouth twitched into a crooked grin. He started that evening. The kids were asleep, Kelly was on shift, the house was empty. He moved the laptop to the garage, connected the printer, and opened the work folder. I selected 12 entries, one for each month. Not the longest, not the most frank, but those that hit the hardest. January, her laughter at the fence while Mark paws her breasts. February, quick sex against the garage wall, her jacket pulled up, his hands on her hips. March, she's on her knees in the car, her hair in his fist. He downloaded a calendar program, simple, free, with templates. I pulled still frames from the video, cropped them, and enlarged them so that the faces were clear. Kelly is flushed, with her mouth half open. Mark is grinning, with a hint of triumph in his eyes. David worked methodically, as on the road, without haste, but with precision. He added signatures short, poisonous, like spit. January, Happy New Year, neighbor. February, is it warm in the garage, Kel? March, quick and to the point. April, rain is not a hindrance to passion. He printed the first pages on cheap paper. The quality was so-so, but the faces were recognizable. The printer hummed, spitting out sheet after sheet, and David watched them stack up, feeling strangely satisfied. It wasn't about revenge, not really, it was more about putting everything out there, making it tangible. He drank beer, leafed through the calendar, chuckled at his signatures. Sometimes a laugh escaped short, dry, more like a cough. Sometimes the fingers squeezed the can so hard that the aluminum cracked. It still hurt, but now the pain was mixed with something else, anger that had finally found a way out. By morning, he had finished the draft. 12 months, 12 scenes, 12 knives into his own heart. He added a headline on the cover, Calendar of the Year, Neighborly Love. The font is bold and red like blood. I printed it out, put it in a folder, and hid it in my toolbox. But this was not the end. He needed an ending, not just a stack of paper, but something that would hit her the same way she hit him. And then he remembered Christmas. 2 weeks later, on December 25th, he and Kelly always had a party, nothing big, just dinner, kids, a couple of friends, neighbors. This year, he decided to do something different. He bought cardboard, glue, a color printer at Walmart for gifts for children, Kelly said. She didn't ask for details, just nodded, minding her own business. During the day, while she worked, he tinkered. I printed the calendar again on glossy paper, with bright colors, so that every frame would be eye-catching. I glued the pages together into a thick book and added a ribbon to hang. On the cover, I pasted a photo of their wedding, he in a cheap suit, she in a white dress, both young, smiling. Under the photo, he wrote by hand, 15 years later. Then I cut out sounds from the video, her moans, his grunts, her laughter, and recorded them on a flash drive. The presentation had to be complete, not only pictures, but also voices, so that no one could get away with it. He planned everything for Christmas Eve. Invite neighbors, not all of them, just those who knew him and Kelly as family. Mrs. Crawford with her pies, Jimmy from the bar who sometimes stopped by with beer, and of course Mark. David imagined what it would be like. A table with a turkey, garlands on the tree, children opening gifts, and then he would get up and say, I have a surprise. He will turn on the projector, the old one that was lying around in the garage, connect the flash drive, hang the calendar on the wall. Let them watch. Let them listen. Let Kelly see his face in the gloss, hear his voice, understand that he knows everything. And Mark let him try to grin when his dirt is dumped in front of everyone. He rehearsed in his head not the speech, but the movements. How he gets up, how he turns on the projector, how he looks into her eyes. He didn't want to scream, he didn't want to fight, just to show. Let her decide what to do next, cry, scream, leave. He didn't care. He was tired of being blind, tired of being silent, tired of forgiving what cannot be forgiven. The calendar became his weapon, funny, angry, sick, but honest. Every month is her lie, every frame is his wound, every signature is his voice that he kept inside for too long. Kelly didn't suspect anything. She was preparing for Christmas as usual, buying the kids' sweaters with reindeer, ordering turkey, chatting about decorations. He nodded, helped, even smiled a couple of times when she joked about his sullen face. But every evening, when she fell asleep or left for her shift, he took out the calendar, flipped through it, and added details. For December, he played a recording from the car hormone, her bare breasts, her laughter. Caption: Merry Christmas, Kel. This was the finale, his point, his way of saying, I saw everything. He didn't know what would happen next. Maybe she'll go to Mark. Maybe he will stay and beg. Maybe the kids will hate him for ruining their holiday. But he didn't care. He wanted one thing: for her to feel at least half the pain that he had been carrying within himself for weeks. The calendar lay ready, hidden in the garage, the flash drive in my jacket pocket. There were 10 days left before Christmas, and he waited, counting the hours like a soldier before a battle. It wasn't about revenge, it was about the truth, dirty like her meetings with Mark, and just as inevitable. Christmas arrived in Hilliard with a thin layer of snow that dusted lawns and roofs, but didn't have time to turn to mud. Garlands were lit on Maplewood, flashing, colored, hastily hung crookedly. The smells of cinnamon, fried meat, and pine came from the houses. The Graysons' evening began as usual. The children went to David's sister, Marge, in Columbus. She promised them cookies and films about Santa Claus, and David and Kelly decided that this was their chance to have an adult holiday. Kelly was in high spirits all week, cooking, singing Jingle Bells, and even hanging a wreath on her door, something she hadn't done in 3 years. David helped, silently cutting potatoes, carrying boxes of decorations, nodding when she asked where to put things. She didn't notice that he hardly spoke, that his eyes were empty, like turned-off streetlights, or I didn't want to notice. By 7 in the evening, the guests began to gather. Mrs. Crawford, gray-haired and hunched, brought her famous pumpkin pie, which smelled like cinnamon and made your mouth water. Jimmy from the Rusty Tap brought out a case of beer and a pack of cigarettes and tapped David on the shoulder. Happy holidays, bro. A couple of neighbors from the end of the street, Tom and Linda, came with a bottle of wine and a story about how their dog ate half the Christmas tree. Mark was the last to arrive, wearing a black jacket and jeans, with a can of Budweiser in his hand. He nodded at David, grinned at Kelly, said, "Merry Christmas, guys," and walked into the living room as if he belonged there. Kelly replied, "And you, Mark," easily, with the same smile that David saw on the tapes. He gritted his teeth, but nodded in response, keeping his face stony. The living room was warm and cozy. The Christmas tree in the corner was flashing red and green, and there was turkey, mashed potatoes, and a bowl of cranberry sauce on the table. The radio played White Christmas quietly, mixing with a hum of voices. Kelly was in the center in a red sweater, jeans, hair down, eyes sparkling. She joked with Jimmy about his hangover, refilled Linda's wine, and laughed at Tom's story. Mark sat on the sofa, sipped his beer, casting glances at Kelly, short but tenacious. David was off to the side by the window, with a bottle of Miller Lite in his hand. He hardly spoke. He only nodded when people addressed him, and looked at her, at him, at everyone who did not know what he had prepared. By 8, everyone was a little tipsy, the wine was flowing, the beer was foaming. Mrs. Crawford was telling how in '78 her husband got stuck in a snowdrift with a tractor. Kelly turned up the music, rockin' around the Christmas tree, and called everyone to the table. David waited until they were seated, until the plates were filled, until the laughter deepened. Then he stood up, put the bottle on the windowsill, and coughed to attract attention. "People," he said, his voice a little hoarse, but firm, "I have a gift. A little surprise for everyone." Kelly turned around, raised an eyebrow, and smiled. "Oh, David decided to entertain us. Come on, show me what's there." The guests made a noise, someone clapped their hands. Jimmy shouted, "Not a striptease, man!" And everyone laughed. David didn't smile. He pulled out a projector from behind the sofa, an old one, with a shabby body, but working, and plugged it into the outlet. Then he took the calendar out of the bag that was lying by the door and hung it on a nail above the fireplace. The glossy pages glittered in the light of the garlands. The cover with their wedding photo, he in a suit, she in a dress, looked ridiculous and creepy. Kelly frowned but remained silent. Mark put down his beer, crossed his arms, looked at her, then at David. "This is a calendar," said David, connecting the flash drive to the projector. "For the whole year. Especially for you and Kelly, Mark." He clicked the button, and the first slide flashed on the wall. January. Kelly at the fence, Mark pawing her breasts, caption, "Happy New Year, neighbor." The sound turned on itself, her laughter, short, ringing like a bell. The guests froze. Mrs. Crawford dropped her fork, and it clattered on the plate. Jimmy coughed. Tom opened his mouth. Linda gasped. Kelly turned pale, and her eyes widened, but she didn't move. Mark straightened up. His face became white as the snow outside the window. David clicked again. February sex against the garage wall, her jacket pulled up, his hands under her. The sound is her moan, dull, almost animalistic. "Is it warm in the garage, Kel?" flashed on the wall. Someone chuckled nervously, uncertainly, as if he didn't know whether to laugh or remain silent. Jimmy muttered, "What the hell?" but didn't finish. Kelly clenched her fists, her nails dug into her palms, but she was still silent, looking at the screen as if it were a sentence. The third slide is March. She is on her knees in the car. Mark is above her. Quick and to the point. Her voice, "Come on," echoes through the room. Linda covered her mouth with her hand. Tom turned away. Mrs. Crawford crossed herself, whispered, "Lord." Mark swallowed, clenched his jaw, but did not get up, did not say a word. His eyes darted from the screen to Kelly, from Kelly to David. The slides went one after another. April, May, June. Every month there is a new scene, a new blow. Garage, fence, backseat of Dodge. Her body, his hands, their laughter, their moans. The captions cut like a razor. Summer of passion, neighborhood help, where's your husband, Kel? The guests reacted differently. Some looked at the floor, some whispered. Jimmy forced out a laugh, but immediately shut up under Tom's gaze. Kelly sat like a statue, her face white, her lips trembling, but she did not scream, did not cry, did not rush to the projector. She just stared, as if paralyzed. Mark was hunched over, his hands clenched into fists, the skin on his cheekbones tense. December is the final. The back seat of the car, her bare breasts, her moaning, her laughter. "Merry Christmas, Kel." The sound was the loudest, her voice, his wheezing, the creaking of the seat. The room erupted into such silence that you could hear the fire crackling in the fireplace. David turned off the projector, disconnected the flash drive, and threw it on the table. The calendar hung on the wall, glossy, bright, like a mockery. He looked at Kelly, then at Mark, then at everyone. "Happy holiday," he said, his voice even, without a hint of emotion. I took my jacket, a bottle of beer, and went out into the yard. The door slammed behind him like a shot. The guests were silent for a second or two, then began to make noise. Linda jumped up and began to pack her things, muttering, "We have to go." Tom pulled her hand and nodded to the others. Mrs. Crawford stood up, leaning on the chair, shook her head. "What a shame." Jimmy cleared his throat, grabbed his beer, and slipped out the door. Mark stood up slowly, looked at Kelly. She didn't answer, just looked at the table and left through the back door without saying a word. Kelly was left alone. The slides were no longer lit on the wall, but the calendar hung, the cover with the wedding photo staring at her like a ghost. She stood up, walked up to it, tore it off the nail, and threw it into the fireplace. The paper flared up, the glossy pages curled in the fire, but this did not help her face, her body, her betrayal were already imprinted in the air, in the memory of those who saw. She fell on the sofa, covered her face with her hands, but there were no tears, only emptiness, shock, and something heavy that she could not yet name. David stood in the yard by his truck, finishing his beer. The snow fell in small flakes and melted on his jacket. He heard the guests leaving and the doors slamming, but did not look back. He did what he wanted, showed the truth, laid it on the table like a turkey. Now let them figure it out for themselves. He got into the cab, started the engine, but did not leave. I just sat there, looking at Mark's house, where the lights had already gone out, and thought that this was probably the end. But he didn't feel the end yet, only cold, emptiness, and a strange relief that he no longer had to be silent. The morning after the Christmas massacre was gray and dank. The snow that fell overnight turned to slush, leaving muddy streaks on Maplewood sidewalks. The Grayson house was quiet, no music, no children's voices, no smell of coffee. Kelly woke up on the sofa, where she fell asleep after the guests left and the calendar burned out in the fireplace. Her sweater was wrinkled, her hair was tangled, and there were shadows under her eyes. She stood up, staggered, walked into the kitchen, poured water into a glass, but didn't drink it. She just stood there, looking out the window at the empty street. David did not return that night. His truck had disappeared from the yard before midnight, and she didn't know where it was. He showed up around 10 in the morning. The door opened without a knock, without a bell. It just clicked, and he walked in, wearing the same jacket as yesterday, with his face frozen like concrete. There was nothing in his hands, only the keys to the house, which he placed on the counter in the hallway. Kelly heard footsteps, turned around, and froze. He looked older than yesterday. The wrinkles around his eyes were deeper, the stubble was thicker, but his eyes were empty, without anger, without pain, just nothing. "David," she said, her voice hoarse and broken. "Where have you been?" He didn't answer. He walked past her into the bedroom and took out an old sports bag from the closet, the one that he took on a fishing trip about 5 years ago. He opened the dresser drawer and started putting things away. T-shirts, jeans, socks, a couple of sweaters. He moved slowly, methodically, as if he was getting ready for a shift and not leaving forever. Kelly stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, her fingers curled into her elbows. "Talk to me," she said, almost in a whisper. "David, please." He didn't look up. He took the boots out from under the bed, put them in his bag, and zipped them up. Then he went into the bathroom, took a toothbrush and razor, and threw it there. Kelly stepped behind him, her voice becoming louder, more desperate. "You can't just leave. After all this, are you going to remain silent? Say something." He stopped, turned to her, and looked straight into her eyes for the first time that morning. Her face was red, her eyes were shining, but there were no tears. She was waiting for a scream, an accusation, a blow, even anything, just to make him talk. But he said only one thing, quietly, evenly, as if reading the weather forecast. "The house is yours. Children need a home. I'm leaving." She blinked, stepped closer, and grabbed his sleeve. "No, you won't just leave. You showed it to everyone. You humiliated me in front of the neighbors, in front of Mark, in front of everyone, and now you're just going to leave? Let's talk, David. I know I screwed up. I know you saw, but let me explain." He shook her hand off, not harshly, but firmly. "There's nothing to explain, Kelly. I've seen enough." She gasped, stepped back, pressed her back against the wall. "It was a mistake," she began. The words were jumbled and came out quickly, as if she was afraid that he would leave before she finished. "It didn't mean anything, David. Mark, it's just, I don't know. I was confused, tired, I felt bad, but I love you, you know. We can fix this, for the sake of the children, for our sake." He was silent, looking down at her. Her voice trembled, her hands shook, but he did not hear the truth in this, only fear, only an attempt to hold on to what had already collapsed. He turned away, went into the living room, and took his jacket from the sofa. She rushed after him, grabbed him by the shoulder, and turned him towards her. "You can't leave me like this," she shouted, and now the tears flowed, hot, fast. "I beg you, David, stay, talk to me, give me a chance. I'll do whatever you want, I swear." He looked at her again, longer than before. I saw tears, I saw despair, I saw the woman I had loved for 15 years. And he said what finished her off more than all the calendars. "I'm not sure if Ethan and Sophie are mine. We'll do a test when I file for divorce." She froze, her mouth opened slightly, the tears stopped, as if someone had turned off the tap. The face turned white, the arms fell along the body. She wanted to say something, to object, to scream, to hit him, but the words stuck. He didn't wait for an answer. He took his bag and the keys to the truck and opened the door. Cold air rushed into the house, bringing the smell of snow and gasoline. "David," she breathed, but he had already stepped outside. The door closed behind him, quietly, without a bang, like a period at the end of a sentence. He got into the truck and started the engine. He looked at the house, at the windows where the curtains they had chosen together hung, at the porch where Sophie learned to ride a bicycle, at the yard where he repaired the lawnmower. This was his home, his life, but now it was all left behind. He felt no anger, no relief, just fatigue, deep to the bone. I pulled out onto the street and drove past Mark's house dark, empty, as if he had run away after yesterday. David didn't stop, didn't look back. Just drove until Maplewood disappeared in the rearview mirror. Kelly stayed in the house. She fell to her knees in the hallway, covered her face with her hands, and now the tears fell silently, evenly, like rain. She didn't know what to do, run after him, call, beg, or just sit and wait for the children to return, for life to move on. His words about Ethan and Sophie burned the most, not because they were true. She knew that the children were his, she knew for sure, but because he said it to hurt her, to cut off everything that connected them. And it worked. David checked into a motel on the outskirts of Hilliard, a cheap one with a neon sign that flashed vacancy. I rented a room for $40, threw my bag on the bed, and sat by the window. I pulled out my phone and found the number of a lawyer who had been recommended by a colleague a couple of years ago when he was getting a divorce. I wrote a short message, "I need help with a divorce. I'll call you tomorrow." Sent, turned off the screen. Then he took a bottle of whiskey out of his bag, the same one he drank the night before the recordings, and poured it into a plastic glass that stood on the nightstand. He drank it in one gulp, winced, and poured more. He didn't make any scandals, didn't yell, didn't break dishes. He just left quietly, as he had lived all these years. The house was left to her and the children because it wasn't their fault, and he didn't want to be the one who breaks their world more than he already did. The divorce would be quick, he wasn't going to drag it out, didn't want to share spoons and sofas, just take half of his savings and leave. And the paternity test. He knew the children were his, but he said it so she could feel what it was like to doubt something that was yours. This was his last arrow, and it hit the target. He sat in the motel, looked out the window at the empty parking lot, and thought that this was the end. Not loud, not dramatic, but quiet, like snow that melts into the mud. His family, his marriage, his Kelly, all this was left on Maplewood, and he moved on alone, with a bag of things and an emptiness in his chest. And for the first time in months, he didn't turn on the cameras, didn't check the footage, and didn't wait for another blow. Because there was no point in watching anymore. Everything he wanted to know, he already knew. David spent the first days after leaving the motel in a fog. I slept fitfully, ate sandwiches from a gas station across the street, and drank whiskey from a bottle that I had brought with me. The motel was cheap, the bed creaked, the sheets smelled of bleach, and someone was coughing outside the wall all night, but he didn't care. He didn't call Kelly, didn't check on the kids, didn't answer calls from her number that flashed on the screen a couple of times a day. Only once did I write to Marge, my sister. "You have children until the new year. I'll sort it out." She responded with a short, "Okay, what happened?" But he didn't explain. He had already done everything he needed to do. He left. But something was still burning inside, not pain, not anger, but a cold, heavy need to finish what he started. The calendar burned in the fireplace, but the records remained, and he decided that they should not remain only his burden. On the third day, December 28th, he sat down at a rickety table in his room and opened his laptop. The internet in the motel was weak, but sufficient. He downloaded all 12 videos from the work folder, the same ones that were in the calendar, with captions, with her moans, with his grins. I compressed them into an archive, called them Maplewood Memories, the memory of Maplewood, with bitter mockery. Then I opened my mail and found the neighbors' addresses. Mrs. Crawford had an old AOL. Tom and Linda had Gmail. Jimmy had something with numbers at the end. He knew them because they had all exchanged contacts for neighborhood help back in the day. Damn ironic. I wrote a short letter. "Hello, everyone. This is what was under our noses. Happy New Year." I attached the archive and sent it. 10 addresses, 10 clicks, 10 neighbors who saw the Christmas show will now receive the full version. The next step was the union. David worked for Local 423, the Ohio Highwaymen, the guys with whom he broke asphalt and drank beer after his shift. They had a general WhatsApp chat and a closed Facebook group for news and gossip. He uploaded the archive there, without a letter, only with a signature. My ex and neighbor. Enjoy. He knew that half the guys would laugh, half would say, get a grip, but everyone would watch. Kelly sometimes came to their picnics, brought lemonade to the children, joked with their wives. Now they will know who she really is. He sent and turned off notifications. He didn't want to read their sympathy or jokes. The final blow was for the region. Hilliard had a Facebook group, the Hilliard Community Hub, where locals sold old couches, complained about noise, and praised school fairs. David was signed there, although he almost never wrote. He created a new post, uploaded a calendar, not a video, but scans of pages that he made for Christmas. The cover with their wedding photo, 12 months with her face and body. The captions are poisonous, like a snake bite. Wrote at the top, Kelly Grayson and Mark Taylor are the stars of Maplewood. Place your bets on who's next. I sent it without rereading it. The group was open, more than 1,000 people, from mothers to old people. Everyone would see. He closed the laptop, finished his glass of whiskey, and lay down on the bed. An hour later, the phone started buzzing with calls, messages, notifications. He didn't look, just turned off the sound and stared at the ceiling. He didn't need to read to know what had begun. The neighbors had already opened their mail. The union was scrolling through the chat, and the Facebook group exploded with comments. He imagined how Mrs. Crawford crossed herself over the screen, how Jimmy laughed and sent messages to his friends, how Tom and Linda whispered behind a closed door. Kelly and Mark became a laughing stock, not just gossip, but a loud, dirty scandal that would live in the area for years. Kelly found out by noon. She sat at home in the same silence as in the morning after David left. The children were at Marge's, the house was empty, only her steps echoed along the corridor. She tried to call him, wrote, "Please come back, we need to talk," but he did not answer. Then Linda called, her voice trembling, her words jumbled. "Kelly, have you seen the mail?" "What is it?" Kelly opened her laptop, went to Gmail, and saw an email from David. The archive downloaded slowly, but the very first frame of her at the fence with Mark made her drop her mug of tea. The fragments scattered across the floor, but she didn't bend down to clean it up. She just watched the videos go one after another as her life fell apart. An hour later, the bartender from the Rusty Tap wrote to her, "Kel, do you know that your videos are in the union group? Everyone is laughing." She threw down the phone without answering. Another half-hour later, a neighbor from the end of the street, Sarah, posted a link to the post on the Hilliard Community Hub. Kelly opened it. 300 likes, 150 comments, scans of the calendar were at the top. "This is Christmas. Who would have thought?" Poor David. A girl of easy virtue and a scumbag. Comments poured in, from shock to anger, from laughter to condemnation. She scrolled until she came across "Neighbors of the Year, bravo," with a sarcastic smiley face. I closed the laptop, but it was too late. The phone was already buzzing with messages, calls, everything. She ran out into the yard and looked at Mark's house. The windows are dark. There is no Dodge. He left, ran away, left her alone under it. She returned to the house, fell on the sofa, and covered her face with her hands. Everyone knew her, the bar, the neighbors, the school where the children studied. Now she was not Kelly Grayson, mother of two, bartender with a smile, but the one who had sex with her neighbor in front of the cameras. Laughter, whispers, glances, it will follow her everywhere. She didn't cry, didn't scream, she just sat there, feeling like the neighborhood was burying her alive. Mark found out later. He left on the morning of the 26th, spending the night with his brother in Dublin, 20 miles from Hilliard. I didn't want to see Kelly, I didn't want to hear gossip. But his brother showed him the Facebook post and grinned. "You're a star, dude." Mark opened it, leafed through it, and turned white. His face is in every month, his hands on her, his grin. Comments, "Mechanic of love, hero of Maplewood, prove that you are a man in the garage." He threw down the phone and cursed, but his brother had already forwarded it to his friends, and they laughed out loud. The union chat room, where he sometimes hung out with David's guys, was also buzzing. "Mark, you're in." Neighbors discount. He turned off the phone, but knew it was useless. They knew him at the car service center. They knew him in the area. Now he was not just Mark Taylor, but the one who slept with someone else's wife and got caught. David was sitting in a motel when the notifications stopped coming. He blocked everyone except Marge and the lawyer. The lawyer replied in the morning, "We'll meet on January 2nd. I'll prepare the papers." David nodded to himself, finished his whiskey, and lay down on the bed. He did not feel joy, did not feel victory, only emptiness, which was now cleaner, lighter. Kelly and Mark became a laughing stock. Their names were heard in every corner of Hilliard, and he knew that this would be forever. He didn't want to destroy them. He wanted them to understand that he saw, that he knew that he was not the blind fool he was taken to be. And they understood. January in Hilliard was cold and gray. The sky hung low like a wet sheet, and the wind chilled to the bone. David rented a small apartment 10 miles from Maplewood, in a neighboring area of Dublin, a one-room apartment with bare walls, an old sofa, and a window overlooking the parking lot. He did not take anything from the house except clothes and tools, leaving Kelly with everything: furniture, dishes, even their old coffee maker, which was never repaired. The divorce proceeded as usual. The lawyer filed the papers on January 2nd, and the process promised to be quick. He did not demand custody, did not argue over property. He just wanted to tear everything up and leave. The paternity test was the final nail. David insisted on it not out of revenge, but out of that cold, stupid curiosity that had been gnawing at him since Christmas night. The results arrived 2 weeks later. The envelope was in his mailbox, simple, white, with the laboratory logo. He opened it in the apartment, sitting on the couch with a can of beer in his hand. Ethan is not his. Sophie is not his. The match with his DNA is less than 1%. He looked at the numbers, at the graphs, at the doctor's signature, and felt nothing: no shock, no rage, only emptiness that confirmed what he suspected. Kelly cheated on him, not for months, not for years with Mark, but for her entire life. The children he raised, whom he loved, whom he put to bed and taught to ride a bike, were not his. He put the papers in the desk drawer, finished his beer, and went to bed. It was the end of the illusion, but he could no longer mourn it. Kelly locked herself in the house on Maplewood. After the calendar spread around the area, after posts, letters, and whispers, she stopped coming out. The windows were covered with curtains, garbage was piling up near the porch, the car was parked under a layer of snow. The children returned from Marge in early January, but she sent them to her mother in Cincinnati. She said that it takes time. They called her, asked where Dad was, why he wasn't answering, but she mumbled something about adult matters and hung up. She was fired from the Rusty Tap. The manager called and said that customers are laughing, but we don't need that. She didn't argue, she just nodded at the phone and hung up. The neighbors no longer knocked or called for coffee. Only Mrs. Crawford left a pie at the door, which Kelly did not open. She was sitting in the living room in the twilight with a bottle of cheap wine that she found in the closet. The TV was silent, the phone was dead, and she didn't charge it. Her world narrowed to the walls of the house, the same ones where she laughed with the children, where she slept with David, where she made plans that had long since crumbled. She knew about the test. The lawyer sent her a copy, and she read it, collapsing on the kitchen floor. It wasn't Mark. She was sure that it all started recently with him. But someone else, years ago, maybe not alone. She didn't remember, didn't want to remember. It didn't matter now. Her life shattered like glass under a hammer, and she did not know how to collect the pieces. Neighbors whispered, friends turned away, work disappeared. She became a ghost in her own home, and every creak of the floorboards reminded her of what she had lost. Mark disappeared from the radar. His Dodge had not been seen on Maplewood since that night. The house was dark. The mailbox was full of flyers. He quit his job at a car repair shop. Colleagues said he simply didn't show up after the new year, leaving behind a toolbox. Someone saw him in a bar in Dublin. Someone heard that he went to his brother, but no one knew for sure. His name became a joke in the neighborhood, Mark the mechanic who fixes more than cars, and he couldn't go outside without getting a smirk or a sideways glance. He avoided people like the plague. His phone was turned off, social networks were deleted, life was reduced to a minimum. He didn't call Kelly, didn't write, didn't try to make excuses. It just disappeared, leaving behind only a dirty trail that still stank up Maplewood. David moved on. Not quickly, not brightly, but as best I could quietly, evenly, step by step. He went to work, waved the flag at 270, repaired asphalt, and drank coffee with the guys at lunch. They knew about the calendar, about the divorce, but did not interfere. They patted me on the shoulder, slipped me an extra can of beer, and remained silent. He removed the cameras from the house before leaving, threw them in the trash outside the motel, and erased the footage from his laptop. He didn't need to look anymore, didn't need to know anymore. He gave this burden to the district, and it took it to the corners. By the end of January, he began to notice that he was breathing easier. Not immediately, not obviously, but the emptiness in my chest became softer, like snow that melts under the sun. He bought a couple of things for the apartment, a lamp, a coffee maker, a TV for $50 secondhand. In the evenings I watched old films, Die Hard, Terminator, and sometimes I caught myself slightly twitching my lips into a smile. Not laughter, not joy, but just a hint that he was still alive. He didn't call the kids, he couldn't until he figured out how to tell them the truth, if at all. Marge wrote that they were fine, asking about him, but he answered briefly, "I'll figure it out soon." On the evening of January 30th, he walked into a bar, not the Rusty Tap, but another one in Dublin, small, with wooden walls and the smell of fried wings. I sat down at the counter and ordered a beer Miller Lite, as always. The bartender, a bald man with an anchor tattoo on his arm, nodded and put down the bottle. Half an hour later, a guy sat down next to him, about 40, wearing a Carhartt jacket with a tired face. He looked at David and chuckled. "You're the guy with the calendar, right?" he asked, not mockingly, just a fact. David nodded and took a sip. To him. The guy grinned and waved to the bartender. "2 whiskeys, at my expense. For your dignity, brother. Not everyone would do that." The bartender poured and placed the glasses. David looked at the amber liquid, then at the guy. "Thank you," he said, and the corner of his mouth twitched upward, almost a smile. They clinked glasses and drank. The whiskey burned my throat, but the warmth was pleasant, alive. The guy patted him on the shoulder and went to his table, and David remained at the counter, looking into the bottle. He wasn't looking for praise, he wasn't looking for sympathy, but this glass, this short nod from the stranger, moved something. He lived on not as a hero, not as a victim, but simply as himself, as a man who survived the storm and came out on the other side. And for the first time in months, he felt that maybe all was not lost. Not everything. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.